Welcome to Jevons Paradox. The more AI codes, the more coders we need. We're going to spend this series exploring a question that feels incredibly urgent today, but actually finds its roots in the smoke-filled skies of 19th century Britain. When we get dramatically better at using a resource, why do we so often end up consuming even more of it?
It's a fantastic question because it runs completely counter to our intuition. We assume efficiency means conservation, less waste, less use. But history often shows us the opposite. This series is a journey into that very paradox. We'll start with its origins in the Industrial Revolution, trace it through the digital age, and finally apply it to the disruptive force of our time, generative AI. We want to seriously question the popular narrative that AI is simply a job killer.
Exactly. And to do that, we have to start at the beginning. Today, we're going back to the source. We'll be talking about a Victorian-era economist who had a stunning insight about his country's most vital resource. We'll discuss the groundbreaking technology that prompted his observation and unpack how an innovation designed for efficiency ended up tripling the consumption of the very thing it was supposed to save.
This origin story is more than just a history lesson. It's the foundational framework for everything we'll discuss later, from digital photography to AI-powered radiology and, of course, to software engineering. Understanding what happened with coal and steam is the key to understanding what might happen with code and AI.
Let's set the stage. The year is 1865, and Great Britain is the undisputed superpower of the world, an empire built quite literally on coal. Coal powered the Royal Navy, it fueled the factories of the Industrial Revolution, it heated homes, and it was the mainspring of modern material civilization, as one writer of the time put it. But there was a deep, pervasive anxiety gripping the nation. What happens when the coal runs out?
This wasn't just a fringe concern. It was a subject of intense public and parliamentary debate. The nation's prosperity was visibly tied to this finite resource, and people could see the rate of consumption accelerating year after year. The logical fear was that their industrial supremacy was temporary, that they were heading for an inevitable decline as the mines became deeper, more expensive, and eventually empty.
Into this climate of anxiety steps an economist named William Stanley Jevons. In 1865, he publishes a book with a rather alarming title, The Coal Question, an inquiry concerning the progress of the nation and the probable exhaustion of our coal mines. But his conclusion was not what people expected. He argued that the real threat to the longevity of their coal supply wasn't wastefulness, but its very opposite, efficiency.
This is the birth of the Jevons Paradox. Jevons observed that as technological improvements made the use of coal more efficient, the total consumption of coal would not decrease, but in fact, increase. He famously wrote, and it's a quote that echoes through to today, "It is wholly a confusion of ideas to suppose that the economical use of fuel is equivalent to a diminished consumption. The very contrary is the truth."
To understand his insight, we need to look at the key technology he was analyzing, the steam engine. The early steam engines, like Thomas Newcomen's design from the early 1700s, were incredibly inefficient. They were mostly used for one specific brute force task, pumping water out of coal mines. They consumed so much coal that it was only economically viable to operate them right at the mine head, where fuel was essentially free.
Think of it like a very early, very bad smartphone. The battery life is so terrible you can only use it while it's physically plugged into the wall. It can do one or two things, but you're not going to carry it around and integrate it into every aspect of your life. That was the Newcomen engine, a useful but niche technology.
Then came the Scottish engineer James Watt. Starting in the 1760s, Watt introduced a series of brilliant innovations. The most famous was the separate condenser, which dramatically reduced the amount of heat wasted with each cycle of the piston. He also developed ways to convert the simple up and down motion into a smoother rotary motion using flywheels and gears.
These weren't just small tweaks. Watt's improvements made the steam engine vastly more efficient, reducing its fuel consumption by as much as 75% compared to the earlier models. And this is where the paradox kicks in. Conventional wisdom would say, great, a steam engine now needs only a quarter of the coal, therefore our national coal consumption for steam power will fall by 3/4.
But that's not what happened. Jevons saw that Watt's innovations didn't just make the old applications of steam power cheaper, they made entirely new applications possible. The steam engine was liberated from the coal mine. Suddenly, it became cost-effective to build a steam-powered factory anywhere, not just next to a coal deposit.
Exactly. The more fuel-efficient engine is like the first smartphone with a decent all-day battery. Suddenly, it's not just a stationary device. You can take it with you. Developers start writing apps for it, it becomes a camera, a navigator, a music player. The efficiency gain doesn't lead you to use your phone less. It unlocks so many new uses that you end up consuming far more data, processing power, and battery life than you ever did with the old, inefficient device.
That's a perfect analogy. Watt's efficient engine made coal a far more cost-effective power source. The textile industry was revolutionized, with steam-powered looms and spindles dramatically increasing production. Iron foundries could use steam-powered bellows. Breweries, potteries, mills of all kinds could now be mechanized. And then came the railways, powered by steam locomotives, which themselves created a massive new demand for coal.
The result was staggering. Jevons demonstrated that this efficiency-led cost drop expanded the use of coal into countless new domains. It wasn't just that existing factories used more coal, it was that thousands of new factories, railways, and steamships that would have been economically impossible with the old engine were now being built.
And the historical data bears him out completely. In the century following Watt's initial innovations, Britain's industrial output soared, and its coal consumption didn't fall. It didn't even stay flat. Between the time of Jevons's writing and the turn of the 20th century, British coal consumption roughly tripled. He had correctly identified that efficiency, by making a resource cheaper and more accessible, actually fuels growth and unlatent demand.
So the legacy of Jevons' observation is this powerful, counterintuitive principle that what was originally about coal and steam now applies to any situation where productivity gains lower costs and, as a result, spark higher total demand. It describes why bigger, faster highways often lead to more traffic, not less, or why bigger hard drives didn't lead to us storing less data, but to an explosion of high-resolution photos and videos.
Which brings us back to the mission of this podcast. The core question is whether this same principle applies to software development and generative AI. The common fear is that AI coding assistants, which make each individual programmer more efficient, will reduce the need for human coders. The narrative is one of automation and replacement.
But the Jevons Paradox offers a different lens. What if making the act of coding cheaper and faster doesn't lead to less coding, but to an explosion of new software, new applications, and new digital experiences that are currently too expensive or complex to build? What if, like Watt's steam engine, AI coding assistants don't just make the old tasks easier, but make entirely new categories of creation possible, ultimately increasing the overall demand for people who can guide, architect, and innovate with these new tools?
That is the central mystery we'll be exploring. We've seen how the principle was born from the Industrial Revolution. Jevons wasn't just an economist. He was a keen observer of the relationship between technology, economics, and human behavior. He saw that efficiency doesn't operate in a vacuum. It changes the economic equation, and people respond to those new incentives.
What we've talked about today is the what, the historical observation. We've seen that making steam engines more efficient paradoxically led to a massive increase in coal consumption. But to truly understand its relevance for the AI era, we need to dig into the why. What are the precise economic mechanics at play here?
And that is the perfect setup for our next episode. We will move from the historical narrative to the underlying economic logic. We'll break down concepts like price elasticity of demand and the rebound effect, which is the modern term for what Jevons observed. We'll explore why this effect is powerful for some resources, but weak or even absent for others.
We'll ask, for example, why skyrocketing efficiency in agriculture led to a massive decrease in the share of the workforce on farms, a seeming contradiction to the paradox. Understanding these nuances is critical. Only by grasping the economic engine that drives this phenomenon can we begin to make informed predictions about how it will play out in the complex, dynamic world of artificial intelligence and software engineering. It's a fascinating puzzle, and the next piece is understanding the rules of the game.
You are listening to Jevons Paradox. The more AI codes, the more coders we need. In our last discussion, we journeyed back to the 19th century, to the smoke and steam of industrial Britain. We saw how a more efficient steam engine, which burned coal more cleanly and effectively, didn't lead to a reduction in coal consumption. In fact, it caused a massive, counterintuitive explosion in demand, a phenomenon that economist William Stanley Jevons first identified.
It's a powerful story because it runs against everything we assume about efficiency. We think more efficient means use less, but Jevons showed us that sometimes it means use more, dramatically more. That historical example lays the groundwork for a crucial question we need to tackle today. Why does this happen? What is the economic engine driving this paradox?
Exactly. If the first episode was the what, this episode is the why. We're moving from the historical observation to the underlying economic logic. We'll be exploring the mechanics of supply and demand that make the paradox possible. We will introduce a critical concept known as the rebound effect and see how efficiency gains can ripple through an entire economy, stimulating growth and, with it, more consumption.
And most importantly, we'll uncover the secret ingredient that determines whether efficiency leads to less consumption or more. That ingredient is demand elasticity. To make it tangible, we'll contrast the story of coal with a very different one, the story of agriculture. Understanding this distinction is the key to figuring out where the Jevons paradox applies and where it doesn't, which is absolutely essential before we can even begin to talk about AI and software development.
The core principle at play here is a fundamental concept in economics, the relationship between supply, demand, and price. When a new technology makes it cheaper to produce something or use a resource, its effective price falls. A more efficient steam engine lowered the cost of mechanical power. What happens when the price of something useful goes down?
People and industries find more ways to use it. It's like discovering a sale on a fantastically versatile ingredient. Before, you might have used it sparingly for one special recipe, but now that it's cheaper, you start thinking bigger. You use it in everyday meals, you experiment with new dishes, you buy it in bulk. The lower cost doesn't just let you do the same thing for less money, it fundamentally changes your behavior and opens up entirely new applications.
This behavioral change is what economists call the rebound effect. The initial efficiency gain gives you a saving. For instance, if your new car is twice as fuel efficient, you theoretically cut your fuel bill in half. That's the expected engineering outcome. But the economic outcome is often different. The rebound effect measures how much of that theoretical saving is taken back by changes in behavior.
Think of it like this. You install high-efficiency LED light bulbs throughout your house. Your electricity bill for lighting should plummet by, say, 80%. But what happens? Because the cost of leaving a light on is now so trivial, you start leaving the porch light on all night for security. You install new ambient lighting in the garden because it's now affordable to run. You're less strict about turning off lights in empty rooms. By the end of the month, your savings on lighting are maybe only 50%, not the 80% you expected. That 30% that you lost to new or increased usage is the rebound effect.
And in some cases, this rebound can be greater than 100%. If the new applications and uses are valuable enough, the total consumption can actually exceed the original amount. When that happens, when the rebound effect more than cancels out the efficiency savings, you have the Jevons Paradox. This is precisely what happened with coal. The lower cost of steam power didn't just make existing factories cheaper to run, it enabled the construction of new factories, the expansion of railways, and the creation of steam-powered ships, applications that were previously unthinkable on a mass scale.
The efficiency didn't just make the old pie cheaper, it made the whole pie bigger. And this touches on the second major mechanism, economic growth. The money saved from efficiency doesn't just vanish into thin air, it gets reallocated. If a factory owner saves £1,000 on coal, that money is now free to be invested in hiring more workers, buying more raw materials, or expanding the production line. Those workers now have more income, which they spend on other goods and services, fueling demand across the entire economy.
So there are two channels. The first is a direct effect. The resource itself becomes cheaper, so we use more of it. The second is an indirect, income-related effect. Efficiency raises our real income, giving us more purchasing power to consume more of everything, including the resource we just became more efficient at using. This combined effect is why efficiency is such a powerful engine for economic growth. It frees up capital and resources to be used in more productive ways, creating a virtuous cycle of innovation and expansion.
But, and this is the crucial point we need to establish, this cycle doesn't apply to everything. The paradox is powerful, but it's not a universal law. It hinges entirely on one factor: how much we really want more of something if it gets cheaper.
You're talking about demand elasticity. This is perhaps the single most important concept for understanding the paradox. Elasticity measures how responsive the quantity demanded of a good is to a change in its price. If a small drop in price causes a huge increase in demand, we say the demand is elastic. If a big drop in price causes almost no change in demand, we say it's inelastic.
Let's use an example. Salt. Salt is a necessity for life and for cooking, but you only need so much of it. If the price of salt were to fall by 90% tomorrow, you wouldn't start buying 10 times more salt. Your consumption would stay almost exactly the same. The demand for salt is highly inelastic. On the other hand, consider something like air travel. If the price of flights to a vacation destination drops by 50%, demand can skyrocket. People who were on the fence will now book trips. People who already planned one trip might now consider a second. The demand for air travel is highly elastic.
The Jevons Paradox, therefore, primarily rears its head in markets with elastic demand. Coal-powered steam was a general-purpose technology. The potential applications for cheap, reliable power were nearly limitless in the 19th century. So, as the price of power fell, demand exploded. The demand was incredibly elastic. Now, let's contrast this with the example you mentioned earlier, agriculture.
This is where the story takes a fascinating turn. Over the 20th century, agriculture saw perhaps the most staggering efficiency gains of any industry in human history. The invention of the tractor, the development of synthetic fertilizers, and advancements in crop science led to an incredible explosion in productivity. A single farmer could now produce many, many times more food than their grandparents ever could.
Following the logic of the Jevons Paradox, we might expect that this massive increase in food production efficiency would lead to a massive increase in food consumption. But it didn't. Why? Because, like salt, the demand for food is fundamentally inelastic. There's a biological limit to how much food a person can or wants to eat. Just because a loaf of bread becomes 50% cheaper doesn't mean the average person will start eating 2 loaves for dinner.
Exactly. The efficiency gains in farming were enormous, but they ran up against the hard wall of inelastic demand. As a result, the rebound effect was very weak, or even non-existent. We didn't end up consuming vastly more calories, we just ended up spending a much smaller proportion of our income on food. The economic consequences of this were profound, but they were the opposite of what happened with coal.
Instead of creating more jobs in the sector, efficiency in agriculture led to one of the largest labor shifts in human history. In the year 1900, roughly 40% of the American workforce was employed in agriculture. They were needed to produce the nation's food. Today, thanks to that incredible mechanization and efficiency, that number is only about 2%.
Think about that. Nearly 40% of the workforce was freed up to do other things. Where did they go? It went to the cities. They went to work in the new factories, in offices, in service industries, sectors that were growing, in part because of the elastic demand for manufactured goods and services. The efficiency gains in farming didn't increase demand for farmers. It displaced them and allowed for the growth of entirely new industries.
This provides a perfect counterexample to the paradox. In sectors with inelastic demand, technological efficiency primarily acts as a labor-saving force, displacing jobs within that sector. The societal benefit comes from redirecting that displaced and capital towards producing other goods and services that people do want more of. In sectors with elastic demand, technological efficiency can act as a demand-generating force, often creating more jobs in that same sector.
So the key takeaway isn't that efficiency is good or bad, it's that its effects are not uniform. The outcome is entirely dependent on the nature of human demand. Does the efficiency make it cheaper to do something we've always wanted more of but couldn't afford? Or does it make it cheaper to do something for which our needs are already saturated? Answering that question is the first step in predicting the economic and social consequences of any new technology.
It gives us a framework. When we analyze a new technology, we can ask, does this technology apply to a good or service with elastic or inelastic demand? With coal, the answer was elastic. With food, the answer was inelastic. That fundamental difference explains why one led to a boom in its industry, while the other led to a mass exodus from it.
And that is the exact framework we need as we turn our attention from the industrial and agricultural revolutions to the digital one. The last 50 years have been defined by Moore's law and the plummeting cost of computation and information transfer. This has made creating and distributing content, photos, videos, music, text, incredibly efficient.
Which brings us to our next episode. We will explore how this digital efficiency has played out. Is the demand for digital content more like coal or more like food? When everyone has a high-quality camera in their pocket, what happens to the demand for photos and the profession of photography? When video streaming becomes virtually free, do we just watch the same amount of television for less money, or does our behavior change completely?
We'll see how the dynamics of the rebound effect and demand elasticity are creating a modern, large-scale Jevons Paradox right before our eyes, from the explosion of user-generated content on platforms like YouTube and TikTok to the paradoxical growth in professional creative jobs. It's a direct continuation of the economic logic we've laid out today, applied to the bits and bytes that define our modern world.
Welcome to Jevons Paradox. The more AI codes, the more coders we need. In our last episode, we unpacked the core economic logic behind the paradox, exploring how efficiency doesn't always lead to less consumption. We talked about the rebound effect, demand elasticity, and how efficiency gains in one area can free up resources and stimulate growth, often leading to an overall increase in demand. We saw this clearly in the agricultural sector, where incredible efficiency gains led not to a collapse in food consumption, but to a massive shift in the labor force.
Exactly. The groundwork we laid was crucial. We established that the relationship between efficiency and demand is far from simple. It's a dynamic interplay of economic forces. Today, we're going to bridge that 19th century theory directly to our modern experience by examining one of the most transformative periods in recent history, the digital revolution. It's a perfect, large-scale case study of these principles in action.
It truly is. The central question we'll explore is this. When the cost of creating and distributing content plummets to near zero, what happens to the overall ecosystem? Did the rise of smartphones, which put a high-quality camera in every pocket, eliminate the need for professional photographers? Did the internet, which allows for infinite free distribution of video, spell the end for professional media production?
We'll investigate this by looking at how lower costs led to an explosion of content, from photos to videos to podcasts. We'll then trace the impact of streaming services and on-demand media, which completely reshaped our consumption habits. This will lead us to the concept of the democratization of media, the idea that anyone can now be a creator. And finally, in true Jevons Paradox fashion, we will examine the counterintuitive outcome, the expansion of professional creative jobs in the wake of this digital tsunami.
Understanding this digital precedent is absolutely essential before we can tackle the core subject of our series, the impact of generative AI. The patterns we identify today in the digital revolution are, in many ways, a direct foreshadowing of the effects we're beginning to see with AI. The story of digital content provides a powerful model for understanding why making a task easier doesn't necessarily make the people who perform that task obsolete.
Let's start with the most fundamental shift, the dramatic reduction in the cost and friction of content creation. Think back to the era of film photography. Taking a picture was a deliberate, costly act. You had a limited number of exposures on a roll of film, 24 or 36 if you were lucky. Each click of the shutter had a real, tangible cost associated with it. You had to buy the film, and then you had to pay to have it developed. You wouldn't know if you got the shot until days later. This friction meant that photography was a more measured and often more professional endeavor.
The scarcity was built into the medium itself. The resources were finite and expensive. That naturally limited the quantity of photos being produced. Contrast that with today. The proliferation of high-quality cameras and smartphones has made the marginal cost of taking an additional photo effectively zero. You can take 100 photos of your cat, choose the best one, and delete the rest with no financial penalty whatsoever.
And the numbers bear this out in a staggering way. Globally, it's estimated that humans now take approximately 4.7 billion photos every single day. That figure is almost incomprehensible. It's an explosion of creation driven entirely by a collapse in production cost. If you had told someone in 1985 that in a few decades humanity would be producing trillions of photographs per year, they would have thought it impossible. The sheer cost of film and development would have exceeded the GDP of most countries.
This perfectly illustrates the first part of the paradox. A massive increase in the efficiency of a process, in this case capturing an image, leads to a far greater increase in the consumption, or in this case, the creation of that good. The efficiency gain wasn't just 10 or 20%, it was orders of magnitude. And the response and output wasn't linear, it was exponential.
This pattern isn't unique to photography. We see the exact same dynamic in video. In the age of VHS tapes and broadcast television, producing and distributing video was the exclusive domain of large studios and networks. It required expensive cameras, editing suites, and access to broadcast infrastructure. It was capital-intensive and required a specialized professional workforce.
Then came the internet, and with it, a new distribution model. But early on, it was limited. I remember the days of dial-up internet. Downloading a single, grainy, postage stamp-sized video could take an hour. The infrastructure wasn't there yet to support mass video consumption. The efficiency of distribution was still a major bottleneck.
Precisely. But then high-speed internet became widespread. Suddenly, the cost to distribute a gigabyte of video data plummeted. This technological shift is what enabled the rise of platforms like YouTube and later streaming services like Netflix. The bottleneck was removed. Just as the smartphone democratized the creation of photos, high-speed internet democratized the distribution of video.
And the result was, once again, an explosion. People began watching far more video content than they ever did in the analog era. The concept of binge watching simply didn't exist when you had to wait a week for the next episode to air on television. Now, entire seasons are consumed in a weekend. And it's not just professionally produced content. The rise of user-generated platforms like YouTube and TikTok means that ordinary people are now creating and broadcasting video content on a scale that rivals traditional media companies from just a few decades ago.
This is the democratization of media in its purest form. The tools of creation and the channels of distribution are no longer controlled by a few gatekeepers. Anyone with a smartphone and an internet connection can, in theory, reach a global audience. This has led to a Cambrian explosion of new content forms: video essays, vlogs, podcasts, webcomics, independent music on Spotify. The total volume of media being created and consumed has expanded to fill the available technological capacity, and then some. It's Jevons Paradox on a cultural scale. The efficiency of digital production didn't just make it cheaper to do what we were already doing, it fundamentally changed our behavior and created entirely new categories of consumption.
This brings us to the crux of the issue and the most counterintuitive part of the story. If anyone can be a photographer and anyone can be a filmmaker, what happens to the professionals? The initial logical assumption would be that their value would decrease. If the market is flooded with amateur content, the demand for expensive, professionally produced content should decline. Why hire a professional photographer for your event when a dozen guests have iPhones that shoot in 4K?
It's a very intuitive assumption, and for a time there was genuine fear within these creative industries. Many portrait photographers and local photojournalists did face immense pressure. But when you look at the industry as a whole, a different picture emerges. The paradox is that the very digital boom that seemed to threaten these professions actually led to an expansion of professional opportunities.
How did that happen? What are the mechanics behind that expansion?
It works in a few ways. First, the sheer volume of content created a new need for curation and quality. In a world with trillions of images, a truly great image stands out even more. Businesses, advertisers, and individuals still need high-impact, professional-quality visuals to cut through the noise. While everyone has a camera, not everyone has the skill, the eye, the lighting equipment, and the post-production expertise of a professional. The ubiquity of amateur photography actually elevated the perceived value of true professional work. The professional photography industry, by many accounts, is booming, not busting.
So the floor was raised for everyone, which in turn created a demand for a higher ceiling. As consumers became more visually literate from being constantly exposed to images, their standards for commercial and artistic photography actually went up.
Exactly, but it goes deeper. The digital revolution didn't just create more demand for existing roles, it created entirely new professional roles that hadn't existed before. Think about it. The rise of social media and digital marketing created a massive demand for content. Businesses that previously might have commissioned 1 or 2 photo shoots a year now need a constant stream of high-quality photos and videos for their websites, Instagram feeds, and Facebook ads. This created the role of the content strategist, the social media manager, and the digital marketing specialist.
And the video editors needed for all those YouTube channels, the sound engineers for the explosion of podcasts, the graphic designers for thumbnails and web assets. These are all skilled, professional jobs that have grown directly out of the ecosystem created by the democratization of media. The influencer economy itself is a multi-billion-dollar industry that simply did not exist 20 years ago. It's a professional class built entirely on the back of these democratized platforms.
It's a perfect example of how efficiency doesn't just lower the cost of a known quantity, it changes the entire system. The increased efficiency of content creation and distribution unlocked latent demand. It turned out that businesses wanted to communicate visually with their customers all the time. It was just too expensive and impractical before. The internet and smartphones made it possible, and an entire new industry rose to meet that newly unlocked demand. The total size of the pie grew. More content led to more platforms, which led to more ways to monetize, which led to more professional jobs.
So the key takeaway here is that the digital revolution serves as a powerful, modern confirmation of the Jevons Paradox. The dramatic increase in efficiency, the collapse in the cost of creating and distributing content did not lead to a net destruction of creative jobs. Instead, it led to an exponential increase in the total amount of content created and consumed. This, in turn, created a new and expanded ecosystem of professional roles, from digital marketers and content strategists to influencers and specialized video editors.
That's the heart of it. The narrative of technology makes things easier, therefore we need fewer people, proved to be too simplistic. Instead, technology made it possible to do entirely new things at a scale never before imagined. It unlocked new demands and created new markets. The amateur explosion didn't replace the professional. It created a bigger playground in which more professionals were needed to build, manage, and stand out.
This is such a critical foundation for the rest of our series. As we now turn our attention to generative AI, we can see the direct parallels. The fear today is that AI coding assistants will make software developers obsolete, or that AI image generators will eliminate graphic designers. But the lesson from the digital revolution suggests a different outcome might be in store.
And that's exactly where we're headed. In our next episode, we will take this principle and apply it directly to the AI-powered present. We'll move from the broad strokes of the digital revolution to specific, in-depth case studies across different industries. We'll look at radiology and healthcare, where AI was supposed to replace doctors but has instead increased demand. We'll examine software engineering, where tools like GitHub Copilot are changing, not eliminating, the role of the coder. And we will return to the creative fields, exploring how generative AI is creating new roles and new possibilities. The story is just beginning.
Welcome to Jevons Paradox. The more AI codes, the more coders we need. In our last discussion, we explored how the digital revolution, from smartphone cameras to streaming platforms, unleashed a torrent of content creation. By drastically lowering the cost of production, it didn't just make existing creators more efficient, it turned almost everyone into a potential creator, leading to an explosion in consumption.
Exactly. That democratization of media was a perfect modern example of the paradox at a macro level. But today, we want to bring the lens in much closer. We're moving from the broad societal shifts of the digital age to the factory floor, so to speak, of today's most advanced industries. The question is no longer theoretical. With generative AI tools now actively deployed, what is happening to the jobs we were told were most at risk?
It's a critical question, and one that fuels a lot of anxiety. The narrative is that powerful AI will inevitably lead to widespread job loss in highly skilled professions, but does the evidence support that? We're going to test that narrative by examining 3 specific case studies: radiology and healthcare, software engineering, and the creative industries. We'll look at what's actually happening on the ground, supported by real-world labor market data.
These fields are crucial to examine because they aren't just tangential to AI, they are directly in its path. These are the professions where AI is being integrated most aggressively, promising to automate complex, knowledge-based tasks. So, if replacement is going to happen anywhere, it should be happening here, right now. What we're finding, however, is a far more nuanced and, frankly, more optimistic story.
Let's start with healthcare, specifically with radiology. For over a decade, we've heard predictions that AI would make radiologists obsolete. The logic seemed sound. AI excels at pattern recognition, which is the core of reading medical images like X-rays and CT scans. The fear was that an algorithm could simply do it faster and more accurately than a human.
It's a compelling fear, but it hasn't matched reality at all. In fact, the opposite has happened. Demand for radiologists and even their compensation is reportedly at an all-time high. What we're seeing is that AI isn't a replacement, it's an assistant. It acts as a powerful screening tool, flagging potential areas of concern and automating some of the more tedious, routine parts of the job.
This frees up the human radiologist to focus on the much harder, more ambiguous cases. They can spend more of their time on patient care, collaborating with other physicians, and handling the complex diagnostic puzzles that require human judgment and a holistic understanding of a patient's condition. The AI handles the high-volume, low-complex tasks, while the human expert handles the low-volume, high-complex work.
We've actually seen this movie before. In the 2000s, the introduction of computer-aided detection, or CAD, from mammography was met with similar anxieties. The technology was designed to help spot potential tumors. Did it lead to fewer radiologists? No. It led to more screenings and more biopsies because the technology made it easier to identify potential issues that required further investigation. This increased the overall workload, demanding more, not less, oversight from trained radiologists.
That's the Jevons Paradox in a nutshell. An efficiency gain in one part of the process, in this case tumor detection, led to a massive increase in the consumption of the overall service, which is radiological diagnostics. The technology made the service cheaper and more accessible, which in turn expanded the market and the need for human experts to manage it.
It's like giving a master chef a super-powered food processor. It doesn't replace the chef. It takes care of the chopping and dicing, allowing the chef to experiment with more complex recipes, design more ambitious menus, and ultimately serve more customers. The core skill of the chef, creativity, taste, and orchestration, becomes even more valuable, not less.
Let's carry that analogy over to our next case, software engineering. This hits very close to home for our podcast's title. Generative AI tools like GitHub Copilot and ChatGPT can now write functional code, debug programs, and automate repetitive coding tasks. The fear here is immediate and visceral. If AI can code, what's left for the human coder to do?
And yet, what we're seeing from industry analysts is not a forecast of mass layoffs, but a call for mass upskilling. Gartner, for example, predicts that by 2027, generative AI will actually create new roles in software engineering and operations. Their analysis suggests that the vast majority, around 80%, of software engineers will need to integrate AI skills into their work, not be replaced by it.
This points to a fundamental shift in the nature of the job. The value of a software engineer is moving up the stack. It's becoming less about the mechanical act of writing lines of code, the digital equivalent of turning a screwdriver, and more about architectural design, system integration, creative problem solving, and, crucially, knowing how to effectively leverage AI tools to build better products.
Think about the evolution of building a house. A century ago, a carpenter's job involved a huge amount of manual labor, sawing wood by hand, hammering every nail individually. The invention of power tools, the electric saw, the nail gun, automated those discrete tasks. Did that put carpenters out of work? No, it allowed them to build bigger, more complex, and more innovative structures in a fraction of the time. The job became less about manual force and more about design, planning, and craftsmanship.
The modern software engineer is in a similar position. AI coding assistants are their power tools. They handle the boilerplate, the repetitive functions, the common algorithms. This frees the engineer to think about the bigger picture. How should this system scale? What is the most elegant way to solve this user's problem? How do we integrate this new AI model into our existing product in a way that is seamless and valuable?
Exactly. The cognitive load is shifting from syntax to strategy. The job is becoming more creative and more demanding, not less. The most valuable engineers will be those who can orchestrate these powerful AI tools to achieve a larger vision. This leads directly to our third case study, which is the creative industries. Here, the fear is perhaps even more profound because AI is encroaching on what many consider to be the last bastion of human exceptionalism, creativity.
With generative AI capable of creating art, music, and written articles, there's a real concern that it will devalue human creative work. We're already seeing analyses suggesting a staggering amount of online content could be AI-generated within the next few years, with some estimates as high as 90% by 2025. This scale is hard to even comprehend.
It is, and if you view it through a lens of simple replacement, it's terrifying. But if you view it through the lens of the Jevons Paradox, it looks like something else entirely, a massive expansion of the creative canvas. For businesses, this means the ability to create personalized marketing, dynamic websites, and customized content at a scale that was previously impossible. A single human team could never hope to achieve that level of output.
So instead of replacing human creativity, it's augmenting it and creating new needs around it. We're seeing the emergence of entirely new job titles that didn't exist just a few years ago. We have AI artists and prompt engineers, whose entire job is to collaborate with AI models, guiding and refining their output to create novel work. We also have a growing need for human curators and editors to manage the sheer volume of AI-generated content, ensuring quality, coherence, and ethical alignment.
It's like the invention of the synthesizer in music. When synthesizers first appeared, many musicians feared they would replace traditional instrumentalists. But what happened? The synthesizer created entirely new genres of music, electronic, synth-pop, ambient, and new roles like the producer and the sound designer became central to the creative process. It didn't destroy music, it expanded its boundaries. Generative AI is doing the same for a much broader range of creative fields. It's a new instrument, and we're just starting to see the new kinds of music it can make.
And the labor market data backs up this expansionist view across all these sectors. This isn't just a hopeful theory. The numbers are telling the same story. A report from Lightcast, a labor market analytics firm, found a truly astonishing increase, over 1,800%, in job postings that mention generative AI since the debut of ChatGPT. That's not the sign of a contracting job market. It's the sign of a tectonic shift.
And it's not just a few tech giants. Companies across finance, marketing, customer service, and more are adding AI competencies to their job descriptions. This signals that we're moving past the initial phase of experimentation and into a phase of deep strategic integration. Companies are committing to this technology for the long haul, and that means they need people who know how to use it.
One of the most insightful findings I've seen came from a study by Boston Consulting Group. They found that generative AI has a remarkable effect on leveling the playing field. In their experiments, novices who were given access to AI tools were able to perform advanced tasks like complex data science analysis that were previously far beyond their capabilities. The AI didn't replace the expert, it turned the novice into something much closer to one.
That is the core insight right there. AI, in practice, is a tool for scaling expertise. It broadens what a single human worker can accomplish. A junior financial analyst can perform a sophisticated market analysis. A single customer service agent can handle more complex inquiries with the help of an AI assistant. A marketing manager can launch dozens of A/B tested campaigns simultaneously. This efficiency doesn't lead to needing fewer analysts, agents, or managers. It leads to the creation of more workflows, more products, and more services, because now they are cheaper and easier to produce. The company grows, and the demand for skilled human oversight grows with it.
So, across healthcare, software, and creative work, the pattern holds. The introduction of a technology that makes a core task more efficient does not lead to a net loss of jobs. Instead, it lowers the cost of the overall service, which increases demand and creates new roles and responsibilities, often at a higher strategic level. The nature of the work changes, but the amount of work expands.
It's a powerful and consistent lesson. The fear of replacement comes from a static view of the world, a lump of labor fallacy that assumes there's a fixed amount of work to be done. The Jevons Paradox teaches us that efficiency is a dynamic force. It doesn't just help us do old things better, it unlocks entirely new things to do.
Which brings us to the crucial next step. If we accept this pattern that efficiency drives expansion, then the challenge for businesses and individuals is no longer about guarding against obsolescence. It's about harnessing this explosive potential.
Exactly. We've traced the paradox from 19th century coal engines through the digital content revolution and now into the heart of the AI era with these case studies. The pattern is undeniable. In our next episode, we're going to focus on strategy. How should business leaders actively embrace this principle? What does it mean for workforce training, process redesign, and competitive advantage? It's time to move from analysis to action.
Welcome to the final episode of Jevons Paradox. The more AI codes, the more coders we need. In our last discussion, we moved from the abstract to the concrete, examining real-world case studies in radiology, software engineering, and the creative fields. We saw a consistent theme emerge. Contrary to the prevailing narrative of replacement, AI is acting as an augmentation tool, expanding capabilities and, counterintuitively, driving up demand for skilled human experts.
Exactly. The fear was that an AI that could read an X-ray would make a radiologist obsolete. The reality is that it has created a higher demand for radiologists to interpret more complex cases, oversee the AI's work, and handle the increased volume of screenings the technology enables. It's a pattern we saw repeated across every industry we looked at. But that leaves us with a critical question, one that moves us from observation to strategy. If AI isn't leading to widespread job loss, what is the deeper economic principle at play? And more importantly, how should leaders be preparing their organizations to navigate and capitalize on it?
That is precisely what we're here to unpack today. We're going to explore the foundational pattern of how efficiency has always unlocked market growth and how generative AI fits perfectly into this historical trend. We'll discuss the practical implications for jobs and the evolution of skills required in this new era. Then, we will synthesize these insights into a coherent strategy for businesses before addressing a crucial caveat, the resource cost of this efficiency boom. Finally, we'll draw our series to a close by summarizing the core lesson of the Jevons Paradox for the age of AI.
This is the connective tissue of our entire series. We've traced the paradox from 19th century coal to 21st century code. Understanding the strategic implications is the final and perhaps most important piece of the puzzle. It's about moving beyond simply reacting to the technology and proactively shaping its impact for growth.
Let's begin with that foundational pattern. There's a powerful consistency in the history of technology. Efficiency breakthroughs don't just make old things cheaper, they create entirely new markets and behaviors.
It's a tale as old as the Industrial Revolution itself. Think of the printing press. Initially, its purpose was to make the production of existing books, like the Bible, more efficient. But the drastic reduction in the cost and time of printing didn't just lead to more Bibles, it unleashed an explosion of literacy. Suddenly, pamphlets, scientific papers, novels, and newspapers became economically viable. The cost of sharing information plummeted, and as a result, the demand for information skyrocketed, creating entire new industries for writers, publishers, distributors, and educators. Efficiency didn't just optimize the existing market for books, it created a new, much larger market for knowledge itself.
And that's precisely the dynamic we're seeing with artificial intelligence. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella pointed out this very phenomenon. He observed that as the cost of AI, the cost of a query, of a token, of an inference, trends towards zero, its use will skyrocket. It stops being a niche, expensive tool for specialized problems and becomes a pervasive, general-purpose utility, almost like electricity. When a resource becomes that cheap and accessible, we find countless new ways to use it.
It becomes a commodity we can't get enough of. Think about the early days of cloud computing. At first, it was just a more efficient way to host a website. You didn't have to buy and maintain your own servers. But as the cost of storage and computation fell, it unlocked business models that were previously unimaginable. Streaming services like Netflix, massive multiplayer online games, and even the training of the very large language models we're discussing today would be economically impossible without that foundational efficiency in cloud infrastructure. The cheaper computing got, the more computing we consumed, and we used it for things the original creators of the server never envisioned.
This brings us directly to the impact on the workforce, which has been the central thread of our series. If AI is a general-purpose utility whose cost is falling, the logical next question is what it means for the people who use it. Business research is becoming increasingly clear on this point. Generative AI overwhelmingly automates parts of tasks, not entire jobs.
It's a crucial distinction. Very few professions are a monolithic block of a single repetitive task. A job is a bundle of tasks. Some are routine and ripe for automation, while others require creativity, strategic thinking, empathy, or complex problem solving. AI is exceptionally good at unbundling these tasks and taking over the routine parts. This frees up the human worker to double down on the high-value tasks that remain.
One economist we read put it perfectly, stating, AI is an addition to other human and specialized skills, not a substitution. It's a tool that complements human intellect. A software developer using an AI coding assistant isn't being replaced, they are being augmented. They can now spend less time on boilerplate code and debugging syntax errors, and more time on system architecture, user experience design, and creative problem solving. Their productivity per hour goes up, which, according to the principles we've been discussing, means the demand for what they produce, functional, innovative software, will also rise.
And we're seeing companies vote with their wallets on this. An analyst from the labor market data firm Lightcast noted that the rapid inclusion of AI skills in job descriptions across industries signals a strategic shift. Companies are moving past the experimentation phase and are now making a full commitment. They aren't writing job descriptions for fewer people, they are writing new descriptions for people who can leverage these new tools. They are hiring for a new kind of productivity.
So if you're a leader in this environment, the writing is on the wall. The correct strategic response is not to plan for headcount reduction, but to invest in transformation. That means fundamentally redesigning work processes and, critically, upskilling the workforce to thrive in this new paradigm.
Absolutely. The focus has to shift from a mindset of replacement to one of enablement. Gartner and other industry experts are advising that successful AI integration requires a deliberate talent development strategy. This isn't just about teaching existing employees how to use a new app. It's about cultivating entirely new roles and competencies. We're seeing the emergence of prompt engineers who specialize in communicating with AI trainers who fine-tune models for specific business contexts, and data scientists who manage the flow of information that fuels these systems.
The World Economic Forum echoes this sentiment, concluding that generative AI can be a massive engine for both productivity and job quality, but only if it is embraced correctly. The strategic imperative for executives is to reframe AI efficiency. It's not just a lever to pull for cost savings, it's an engine for growth. The core question for a CEO should not be how many jobs can I cut with AI, but what new products, services, and markets can we now create because AI has made the previously impossible possible.
It's about finding the latent demand. What could your business do if generating 1,000 unique marketing images was essentially free? What new customer service models could you offer if you could analyze every single customer interaction in real time? What scientific research could you undertake if you could simulate molecular interactions at a fraction of the previous cost? Efficiency unlocks these opportunities. The companies that thrive will be the ones that use that new capability to innovate and expand, not just to trim the fat.
However, we have to address the other side of this coin. The original Jevons Paradox was about a massive increase in the consumption of a physical resource, coal. And while AI feels ethereal, it runs on a very real, very power-hungry physical infrastructure. This is where the paradox comes full circle.
Right. The incredible efficiency gains in AI algorithms and hardware have a direct and often overlooked consequence: a staggering increase in the demand for the resources that power them. Every ChatGPT query, every image generated by Midjourney consumes electricity in a data center somewhere. Richer, more complex, and more widespread AI use drives up the energy needs of these facilities. This is the classic Jevons effect manifesting in the 21st century. Making AI cheaper to use leads to us using a lot more of it, which in turn places enormous strain on the underlying infrastructure, the supply of advanced GPUs, and, just as importantly, the electrical grid.
Businesses that are serious about scaling their AI capabilities have to plan for this. It's no longer just a software problem, it's an infrastructure problem. They need to secure access to massive amounts of computing power and plan for the associated energy costs. But it's also important to note that the paradox is at play on the supply side as well. The same drive for efficiency that lowers the cost of using AI also pushes innovation in curbing its resource consumption.
That's a key point. It's not a runaway train with no brakes. There is a parallel track of innovation focused on making AI itself more efficient. Techniques like model compression and quantization allow powerful models to run on less demanding hardware. Caching common queries prevents redundant computation. And most importantly, there's a hardware arms race to create specialized chips, application-specific integrated circuits, or ASICs, that are designed to run AI workloads using a fraction of the power of general-purpose GPUs. So, while overall demand for resources is surging, the cost per unit of computation continues to fall. For most companies, the expectation is that the growth in demand and opportunity will continue to outpace the constraints imposed by resources, at least for the near future.
Which brings us to our conclusion, the culminating insight of this series. The Jevons Paradox is not just a historical curiosity about steam engines. It is a fundamental principle of technological progress, and we are living through its most dramatic modern incarnation. The central lesson is that lower unit costs unlock latent demand. The era of generative AI is unfolding precisely along these lines.
Every advancement, from smarter algorithms to more efficient hardware, lowers the cost of applying intelligence to a problem. This, in turn, broadens its use, democratizing a capability that was once the exclusive domain of a few elite tech firms. We've seen through historical analysis and contemporary data that this process doesn't destroy jobs, it transforms them and ultimately creates more. The nature of work evolves, the locus of value shifts.
For the executives, the strategists, the builders listening to this, the takeaway is unambiguous. The narrative of fear around AI-driven job loss is a distraction from the real story. The real story is one of opportunity. The challenge is to strategically adopt generative AI not as a defensive measure, but as an offensive tool to amplify productivity, to invent novel products and services, and to cultivate the new skills your workforce will need to thrive.
This is how the efficiency gains from technology are translated into durable, competitive growth. By understanding this counterintuitive principle that making something more efficient often leads to us demanding more of it, we can better navigate the changes ahead. We can move from a position of anxiety to one of action, building organizations that are not just resilient to this technological shift, but are actually powered by it. The paradox isn't a problem to be solved, it's a dynamic to be harnessed.